All right, why don't we get started? I think we have a lot of folks that attended at least one of the sessions before today. So I'm going to go through the same thing, but some of you might have heard it before. So before I jump in, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement really briefly. So all of us that are here in Maine, we're on the Wabanaki territory, and we're still trying to figure out the best way to respect their rights and our relationship with them on their land. But we like to acknowledge before we jump in that we're still working on that, and that the inclusion of their values and their science in our forest stewardship throughout the state is incredibly important. So Maine Tree is a nonprofit that focuses on forest sustainability and communicating that through our different programs. So we have quite a few different programs. The ones that are in my wheelhouse are the ones that are education. The Forest Maine Teacher Tours I'll touch on later, which is another PD or professional development event that we have every summer. And then Project Learning Tree we'll be talking today. And I'll also mention Forest Ecology Research Network today too. We're going to start with Kristen Hoffman, who is from the Forest Society of Maine. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and Kristen, you can take that over. Okay.
All right. All right. Everyone got it?
Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, I'm Chris Hoffman. I'm a Forestland steward at the Forest Society of Maine. I have been here at the Forest Society of Maine just over 15 years now. I love talking about conservation in Maine, and I have spoken to other PLT groups and Maine tree groups before, and I'm always happy to do so. Please feel free to stop and ask questions along the way if you have any. I'm happy to take some at the end and let you have my contact information if you need any further information, but please feel free to go ahead and ask as we go along. So the Forest Society of Maine, what we do. So we conserve Maine's forest lands for 4 specific reasons. It's kind of like the 4 legs of our mission for the economic, ecological, cultural, and recreational values of Maine's woods. A lot of land trusts don't jump into the ecological, they do, into the economic portion of sustaining Maine's forests. But since we're working in the Northern Forest, that's a huge part of the Northern Forest and keeping forests as forests. Why we do it? Maine is very special. We have a huge block of forest land. I'm sure all of you have heard all of this in previous presentations and things like that. You know that about 90% of Maine is forested, which is the highest percentage of any state. And another unique thing about Maine is that it is mostly private land. We don't have a lot of federal land. We have some state land, but it's mostly private land that's out there. A lot of forest land that's covered. So here's how we try to conserve Maine's forest lands. There's fee ownership, which is also called conservation ownership. Conservation easements, which is the Forest Society's largest tool in conserving Maine's Northwoods. Contracted stewardship, we do a lot of baselines and monitoring for other organizations and state agencies. And we also facilitate conservation. So basically the Forest Society loves to sit down and bring all the parties together. We have a lot of great relationships with industrial landowners, private landowners, state agencies, other land trusts, other nonprofits, funding agencies. And we work to bring everybody to the table and hopefully to come to a consensus on how best to conserve our lands. So the Forest Society has helped to conserve over 1 million acres of forest land in Maine. this map kind of gives you an idea of where all of our projects are located. We have 49 conservation easements at this time. I think by the end of next year, we should have about 52 or 3, and then growing from there. Our easements range in size from 20 acres down in that Porter region, down in the southwestern part of the state, all the way up to 851.86 acres. And that is our Moosehead Region Conservation Easement. And so that covers large portions around Greenville, Moosehead Lake, up to Rockwood, places like that. So I'll ask you guys, sometimes I get groups that love to tell me everything, and sometimes I get quiet ones, but why do you think conservation is important? No one?
My answer to my answer to that is I have kids.
Excellent. So you have kids and you
Yes.
want them to be able to see the forests as they are, correct?
Yes,
And
exactly.
enjoy it the way you have. Exactly. So what are they enjoying? They're enjoying access to the woods,
Hiking, camping,
recreation,
canoeing. Yep.
Uh-huh. What else is the conservation important for?
We have a couple comments in the chat. There's to help preserve it for the next generations and biodiversity, all species, including humans.
Biodiversity, yeah. So, I mean, it helps keep us with clean water. It's habitat for wildlife. It provides corridors for wildlife and plant species to move, especially with climate change. They need places to be able to go. So if you have unbroken forest land, you have those corridors. We talked about access, recreation, and now we have carbon storage as a big buzz thing as well. So there's a lot of reasons to conserve Maine's forest lands. So why is conservation so important here in Maine? So a few decades ago, most of Maine, northern Maine, was owned by large paper companies, right? They owned large swaths of land in which they allowed people to access the property, to recreate on the property. They even maintained recreational facilities for hunting, and trails, all of that. But then they started selling off their land. They started selling them to TIMOs, which are timber and investment management organizations, and REITs, real estate investment trusts. We started selling off lots, all of those things, and got scared. No one had any idea of what their rules were going to be or how they were going to manage their lands or manage access and recreation on those lands. So that's where FSM's mission comes in, that we wanted to these landowners to maintain all of those different attributes. Oops. So in 1997, this was your basic conservation landscape in Maine. About 50 to 75,000 acres were conserved. One big swath of that is Baxter State Park. And then there are a number of the conservation fee ownerships are mostly state-owned lands, state parks, public lands. There are a couple of conservation easements. There's a big block over there on the western side, and that is the Forest Society's very first easement, the Addian Township easement. And so this is kind of what it looked like. And here's what it was in 2019. It's grown since then, but it's grown a lot in that decade, basically. So there's over 2 million acres of conserved land. Land has been added up and around Baxter State Park, and then a lot of conservation easements have gone into place. The Forest Society has a large amount here and here, over here. We have some over here. And we have tiny, you can see little pieces of yellow all over the place. There are a lot of land trusts in Maine, a lot. The Forest Society is one of the largest Northwoods. We have called ourselves our land trust of the Maine's Northwoods. The But there are a lot of other local smaller land trusts all over the state as well. So this map gives you an idea. This is the human footprint map. So this shows you basically where development is high in those reddish areas to where there's basically no development in the green areas. So you have forests versus towns. Now, I always get a lot of questions. Why is there all of that red up in Aroostook County on the Canadian border, on the Canada border? Does anyone know why it would be red all the way up there? It's just increased land use. That's where all of the agricultural fields are. That's where they have their potato fields, broccoli, all of those things. It's huge agriculture, so it's not forested. It's basically developed, even though there might not be as many people living there, but the land is. And so now if we put the conservation on that, you can see that it is really, really concentrated and focused on keeping Maine's forests as Maine's forests. It's not going out into developed areas very much, except for key parks and things like that. But we want to keep it looking the way it is now for future generations. Exactly. My gratuitous beautiful photo shot slide. Everyone has to have one, right? I was at a workshop once. It was a while ago. And I remember sitting there and they were talking about an easement that had just gone into place down east. And everyone, you know, all the land trust people and state agencies were really excited that this huge easement went into place. And they had a bunch of the public there to talk about it. And one woman raised her hand and she goes, I know the easement went into place, but it looks exactly the same as it always did. And I was like, yay, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. It's not all of a sudden going to grow more trees or anything like that, but it gives you the stage to be able to do that and let it grow as it needs to and be sustainably managed. So some people think that with conservation that the land just changes immediately, but we just want it to stay the same. So tools for forest land conservation. These are the two biggest tools that we have in the state and for the Forest Society. And one of them is the conservation ownership, which is land owned by a government agency or a conservation organization. The Forest Society owns a small tract of land up near Greenville, but that's it. Otherwise, our major tool are conservation easements, which can be held by a government agency or a conservation organization. All of the lands and easements, they can be donated, they can be purchased, they can be have a bargain sale. There's a lot of ways to get around it. Some of them are regulated. So it really depends on the project and what is going on and the landowner and what they want it for. But we do purchase quite a few easements, especially the larger ones. And the smaller ones are normally donated by smaller landowners who are just looking to have someone take care of their land into the future or make sure that it's taken care of. So conservation ownership. Like I said, land trusts, towns, state agencies, federal agencies, we have a lot more towns coming in and creating community forests, which is awesome. And so again, whether they're being donated or they're buying them, land is always worth it. And any of these can come in and buy the land. We have people calling us and saying that they have land that they would like to give to us. It's expensive to own land, so we are not looking to own much ourselves, but there are definitely organizations that take that on and do a lot of trail building on their own. We don't so much. And then there's conservation easement. So I talk to university students a lot, and I would say maybe only not even a quarter of the students I talk to really know what a conservation easement is. And so I'm just going to explain it to you anyway, even though most of you probably do know, but just in case you're wondering exactly what a conservation easement is and how it works to conserve Maine's forest lands. If you think of land rights And you think of them each as a stick, and you have a bundle of sticks. So basically you have a bundle of rights that a landowner has. They have the right to build houses. They have the right to dig wells. They have the right to mine their property. They have the right to ride ATVs on it. They have all of these rights, right, in their hands. What happens is they contact an organization such as the Forest Society or someone, and they say, we want to preserve some of these other rights. So usually most easements, our first objective is to eliminate or limit development. So we will take that development stick. That's the most important part. Another one is probably mining, you know, like, okay, we're going to take that mining stick. There are a number of easements where mining for gravel is written into the easement, and then there are restrictions around it. But other subsurface mining and things like that will take that out. And then other things depend on the landowner's objectives, you know, what they want to see in the future. They have the right to manage their forests, but maybe we'll take the stick and part of it and talk about how to manage sustainably. And then you also worry about the land. So you have the landowner objectives and you have the land trust objectives. And every single easement is individual and unique. It depends on the unique features of the property. Are there wetlands to protect? Are there deer yards? Is there inland waterfowl and wading bird habitat? Are there vernal pools? Are there bogs? Are there any neat landscape features that you might not find other places? That would be a great place for different and unique species to be able to grow. And you think of all those conservation values, riparian zones. And then you also have to bring in funding sources. So the donor stipulations. If we get money from the Land for Maine's Future program, which many of you have probably heard of, the land is required to stay open for public access, for hunting, and for trapping. And so that has to be written into the easement as well, that will always remain open. Easements, all of our easements last into perpetuity. So they are forever. Sometimes if it's regulated through a state agency or a planning process, they might make them 30-year easements. That is not very common, but every once in a while you run into that where the easement is only in place for 30 years. But all of our easements and all land trust easements really are sorry, the building is shaking, are into perpetuity. Oh, I did that. So there are many different types of conservation easements, like I told you, that they're all unique. You have working forest conservation easement, which is one of the ones which is what we work with the most, but we also have a number of ecological reserve conservation easements. So if working forest allows people to come in and manage the property, and which means that they can remove vegetation, maybe have some gravel pits, build roads, build snowmobile trails, have ATV trails, things like that. Ecological reserve CEs pretty much eliminate any use on the property. Most of them will allow public access, but some of them don't even really want to put in trails. So going out to check those easements every year is quite a challenge, trying to get in on them. But they want them to just be able to grow with natural processes. There are land trusts that will buy land and then usually try to restore it. So they'll take out culverts or water barriers, things like that, and then just hopefully let it all grow back naturally. And then sometimes, usually held by the state, are recreation conservation easement or recreation easements, where it's mostly if they want access and people to be able to go in and recreate, and they don't worry about the no developments or anything like that. So a working forest easement, there are a wide variety of restrictions, and I keep saying not every easement is the same. They are all unique. Each is tailored to the property and the goals of the project. we try not to be prescriptive here at the Forest Society because we understand that things change. The future can bring a lot more different technologies, a lot of different ways to harvest, and a lot more research is being done, and we're learning more and more all the time. So our easements mostly define goals for management, such as we want to see biodiversity, we'll protect wildlife habitat, we'll make sure that there is room for recreational uses. And all of these things need to be discussed within a forest management plan, which is submitted to the Forest Society. And that is what we look at and get back to the landowner if we think that there is anything that we think would interfere with the terms of the easement going forward. If there is not, that's fine. I have learned that most foresters are trying to do their very best. And I trust most of my foresters that I work with, all of them really. And so I don't have a right to approve it or not approve a forest management plan, but I can let them know if I see any problems. And if they really, really think that what they have planned is not going to violate the easement, it's really what happens on the ground that determines it, not their plan. So I've had foresters where I've said, well, if you do this, you might be encroaching in on this and you have to worry about how much volume you're taking out. And they're like, no, we can do it this way and this way. And so it's okay. And if I go out and check after, it depends, whatever happens on the ground, that's what determines it. We have really, really good foresters in Maine, which is very lucky. The licensed foresters can be wonderful. There are some really great ones out there, and luckily I get to work with a lot of them. And so they work really hard on their management plans and then following through on them. So for sustainable forest management, we are trying to ensure that no more is harvested than grows. So we have a few different ways to figure this out. And obviously the larger landowners, the industrial landowners have, they are projecting out decades. But what we do is in our management plans, we look for how much volume they're planning to take out and make sure that no more is taken out in a 10-year period than would grow in a 10-year period. So they tell me what they took out, and you figure out how much should be growing per acre and things like that. Special places are protected. I talked about that. Maintaining and enhancing water quality, not converting stands to different forest types. Basically, we don't want any non-natives coming in. Not saying that it should not go to hardwood to softwood, things like that. That happens all the time. Maintain and enhance wildlife habitat and manage at stand property and landscape scale. So we're looking at the big picture, but we're also looking at each individual as well. There's a lot to take out, and if they harvest really heavy in one, have another 50,000 that they're not touch, then that works too. It's all depends on skill and what's appropriate for the at that time property. I think I already talked about a little bit, but nonprofit land trusts, such as the Forest Society, state agencies, and federal agencies, those are the ones really that are holding easements. And they're the ones that can get grants and have a lot more funding capabilities for holding the easements. Maine actually does have an easement registry. So everybody has to say, you know, what lands they have, where their easements are, when they last monitored it, when the last annual report was. So Maine is trying to keep track of all of the easements because there's a lot, and obviously record keeping can vary from land trusts that are nationwide accredited, such as us and some other ones, to some land trusts that maybe are completely volunteer staffed or have one staff member. And so it's harder to keep track of those, but the state is trying to do that, and they make sure that all the land trusts and everyone puts in what easements they have. So who grants easements and why? We have large and small landowners. Like I said, anywhere from 20 acres to over 350,000 acres. And why do they do it? A lot of them get tax benefits. There's that possibility of income. The regulatory offset, I said if it's regulated. And a lot of them really just want to ensure the vision maintained for future generations. So a lot of people have this land and they're not sure what's going to happen to it after they're not there anymore. Either they don't trust their children, they don't have children, they don't want to see it split up. That happens so often. They have a vision for, they put their heart and soul into this land and they have a vision for what they want it to look like. And the only way they can think of to make sure that happens is to put it in an easement because we check it every single year. So, and then public agencies and NGOs. So easement stewardship, that's where my job comes in conservation. We have a number of ways that we steward our easements. We are boots on the ground, every easement, every year. So that's one thing that we need to do. We do aerial monitoring. So basically we'll fly up in a plane over many of our projects. We fly over the large projects yearly, and then we'll fly over smaller projects or projects that we feel that there is some risk to based on either harvesting or adjacent landowner activities or natural disturbances that we need to check out. And we'll do that on a rotating basis on when needed. We have remote sensing and satellite imagery that we check out every time that it comes out. So it could be yearly, and then some other imagery comes out every other year, but we're looking at that to see if harvesting encroached on any of the special protected areas or over boundary lines. And then we have communications, which is huge. We are talking to our landowners all the time. We have a stipulation in our conservation easement that require an annual meeting every single year, so that we're talking to them about what they did in the past year and their plans for the coming year. And we write up baseline documentation as well in order to make sure that those terms of the easement are met. So why I chose a profession in forest resources. Yeah, so I was told that sometimes you guys like to hear about career paths or how we got there. But it was, I have a lot of interests and you'll see in my next slide, but I really, really was drawn to forest management. It's the big picture. Basically, if you can save the stage, all the players will come, right? You're going to have your plays, but you have to set the stage first. And so I love the idea of working for the Forest Society and the whole landscape scale conservation that we do here. I'm not putting down any of the smaller land trusts. I mean, those 5-acre salt marshes are super important, especially for some habitat and wildlife, and I get that. But I love the idea of millions of acres working towards sustainability and conservation of that. And it's my backyard. I live in Maine and we have forests, and that's what I want to help conserve. And so here's how I got there. My undergraduate degree was done at North College in Ashland, Wisconsin. With I have a BS in biology and psychology. Basically, I was focused on animal behavior. So I studied wolf packs and their movement habitat and movement, and also osprey and the effects of some different chemicals on osprey and whether they were coming back to the same places, how they were fishing, things like that. And so I got my undergrad. I went to Acadia National Park as a park ranger. I worked there for a number of years. And then I joined the US Peace Corps. I was in the Philippines as a coastal resource manager. I did a lot of coral reef studies and conservation and worked with small kind of towns and villages within the Philippines on preserving their coral reefs. And then I came back and got my Master of Science in Forest Management at the University of Maine in Orono. So I could take kind of all of that and put it together to what I'm doing today. One of my favorite things that I get to do, I do a lot of outreach with the Forest Society as well. I get to talk to people like you, but I also take kids into the woods. So I don't do it as much. COVID really put a damper on things, so I haven't been out there, but I used to go out twice a year with the airline school, which is in Aurora, Maine, in Amherst, and we would get out on the Amherst Mountains Community Forest, which the Forest Society helped to protect, and it's owned by the state. And we go out twice a year. It is a great community forest for kids to get out there, and some great hiking. Obviously, we have vernal pools. There's 2 lakes that we would walk to every year, and they had a great time. And then we did big plots, which are now, I know, known as the Maine Forest Ecology Network, or FERN. And so, like I said, I took them out twice a year, and we would always try and do those plots twice a year as well, so that they could see it in the fall, but then we would also go back out in the spring, so that they could, check out the species, how things change, how things look different, the different kind of wildlife that is there. You actually have to walk through a very, very young forest to get to these plots. And so you can hear the different bird songs just as you walk along that trail. And that was really cool. If you can get them to stop and listen, then they get really excited. They get excited about, I have kids holding salamanders and looking at spider webs, and things like that. And they love to paint the trees. Absolutely love it. So a lot of land trusts, the Forest Society is big. We're like land trust for the North Woods. And we're getting out there and doing that. But there are so many local land trusts who are very community oriented. And a lot of them have outreach and education staff as well. And some of them have their own land that they love having people go out on. We now have, like I said, that land in Greenville, the Nickerson Tree Farm. And we work with more organizations like NREC, which is what it's the Education Resource Center for Greenville up there. And we work with the Appalachian Mountain Club, the Maine Appalachian Mountain Club, things like that, to get kids out onto the property. The Piscataquis County Soil and Water Conservation District is also super active in that area. And a lot of times they'll ask, hey, could you lead another tree ID tour on your Nickerson Tree Farm, things like that. So if you're in an area and you're not sure if there are land trusts around that you could work with, it's easy to go to the Maine Land Trust Network site, which is www.mltn.org. And it lists all of the land trusts that are in the state. You can look by map, you can look by county, you can look in alphabetical order, by region, all of those things to find a land trust in your area. I don't think I would know one land trust that wouldn't want to work with a school or a group of kids if someone reached out to them. So that is one way to get, some more resources and things out there, even if they don't have their own land, things like that. They have other ways to help bring the outdoors to the kids if it's not as feasible to bring the kids to the outdoors as it is in some places. So that kind of concludes my basic look at conservation in Maine and the landscape of it and what's going on. Is there anything else you guys would like to know or any questions?
Thank you so much. I actually have a question. So like you mentioned, like a lot of land trusts tend to like localize. Does working statewide, does that make your job harder? Like there's benefits because you are able to do so much on like a landscape scale, but does it make it harder to do it at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, we do not have a lot of our own land. And so if we really, really want to get that push to get kids out there and things like that, we are relying on other landowners basically to do that. We're lucky with Amherst and the Amherst Mountains Community Forest because it's owned by the state and they are more than happy to let us go out there as much as we want. And up in Greenville with the Nickerson Tree Farm, but because our reach is so wide, I would say it just makes my job more interesting. You know, I'm giving talks to land trusts and boards in down near Porter and Freiburg. You know, I'm going out to the Down East area and Grand Lake Stream and talking out there. So it's kind of interesting to do that. But if you really, really wanted to make an impact in an area, we don't necessarily have that ability. But we have a lot of other ways to do it. So we don't have that kind of that local, like everyone come out and let's clean the trails or, you know, things like that. But we have other things, which is great. And I just saw that someone was also a Northland grad. So yay. It's funny how many of us are out there because it's a really small school. Northland is smaller than my high school was. But it's an excellent outdoor education college. It was, yeah, I loved it there.
I don't think I'd ever heard of Northland until today, and now there's two people on one call. That's fascinating. I had a couple questions, but I'll stick with one to start. You mentioned recreation at the beginning, and I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit more about how recreation across Maine is unique and why this is an important characteristic to conserve.
I think you're trying to tie in the whole idea of private land ownership and recreation. Yeah. So Mainers have that. We've always had that ability to hunt, snowmobile, ATV, hike, fish, anywhere in the North Maine woods most of the time. We're incredibly lucky. So that is why, one of the reasons why everyone got really scared when the large paper companies started selling off their lands. Because a lot of private landowners in other areas of the country aren't so open with their land, but because of that tradition in Maine, it was really, really important to the people of Maine and thus became important to the landowners as well, thankfully. And like I said, in the Land for Maine's Future program, and they require it for all of those conservation easements that go into place. And if people buy land, they give money for that too. Even in fee ownership, they have to keep it open. And so keeping the land open for recreation was really important. And that's something that Mainers and conservation organizations and landowners have really worked hard at being able to maintain. Letting clubs in to create and maintain snowmobile trails across private land is awesome. You know, they work really, the clubs themselves have worked really hard to become credible and trustworthy to go out there and work on people's lands. And with Maine's limited liability laws, you know, we get to go out there and recreate, and the landowner isn't going to be liable when people go out and do stupid things when they're hiking or going out there and trying to bushwhack their way to another lake so that they can go fishing. So we have a really awesome tradition in Maine, even with all of our private land ownership, that we can go out and recreate in so many places. And the North Maine Woods, that organization itself has been able to take on a huge brunt of the Northern Maine woods and maintaining campsites and trails and a lot of infrastructure there so that people can recreate in the North Woods without putting a lot of that burden on the landowners themselves. So they work with the landowners to make sure that that's open and maintained. So we're pretty lucky.
when you talk about the limited liability law, does that just apply to land that's in conservation, or is that for everyone?
That's for everyone.
Really? And what does that mean? Like if someone goes out and gets say a tick bite and they get a severe reaction to that, then the landowner is protected from that?
Basically, yes. I am not a lawyer, so
Right.
but that's the intent. That's the spirit of it.
Yeah. And have you experienced problems with ticks?
I have, I mean, I guess it really depends on the person, right? So I come from Wisconsin, where we have way more ticks than Maine has ever had.
Really?
So they don't bother me very much. I mean, I don't like the idea of the deer ticks, but I will come off some properties and I will have to pull 15 ticks off of me. But they're almost all dog ticks or wood ticks. They're not the deer ticks.
Okay, so there in the northern part of the state, there's less of that problem than in the coastal areas where I am.
Right. Yes. No, definitely. Northern Maine, they're just starting to deal with this problem. They haven't had ticks there before. My husband is from Fort Kent, and he is incredibly squeamish. So when the dogs or the kids get ticks, I'm the one who takes them out. I have no problem. But he is not used to seeing them at all. And they're still pretty rare up in the northern woods, but around Bangor, I have a lot of easements around Bangor, and a lot of them can be grassy, you know, growing in woods roads, things like that. And that's where they love to hang out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I have friends, and I know a lot of people who really struggle with letting their kids go out and recreate because they're terrified of ticks and tick-borne diseases, which I get, but I couldn't imagine curtailing my children's time in the woods or running around in nature because of ticks. So they run, I let them go through the woods, I let them bushwhack, I let them do all of those things. And then, before we get in the car, we do a quick tick check. And then when we get home, we strip, do a full tick check, and jump in the shower. And knock on wood, we've been fine and lucky. I know not everybody is, but for me, it's worth it because it's still outside in nature. And that's so much more important than having to worry about pulling out a few ticks.
I can definitely second that. I was raised in Connecticut, which is Connecticut's the home of Lyme disease. So we have a lot more ticks here. So I have talked to a lot of teachers about doing what we can to normalize. Ticks, they're obviously not going away. And like, for example, I have a cousin who's from Lincoln, Maine, and they have entirely shifted their recreation habits. They're like lifelong hunters, and they no longer do that because or they don't do it as much because they're afraid of ticks. And so they're obviously probably not going away anytime soon. So doing what we can to educate and try to reinforce those safe ways that we can coexist is really helpful in like mitigating those anxieties and bringing them back down. Because I totally get it too, especially if I hadn't grown up like that. I think I would definitely have a different perspective. But yeah, the only tick-borne illness I've ever gotten was in Africa, so doing pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, I had Giardia a few times, but that was only from the Philippines. So
Not to belabor the tick point too long, I had Lyme disease in summer 21, in 2020. So 2 summers back to back, but it hasn't stopped me from going outside. And it's manageable if you catch it early, and just being vigilant the entire time is just an important aspect of just being outdoors in the first place. And so just developing those practices. I've been a lot better since those 2 encounters, and I'm sure we can do a lot better as a community and making sure that it doesn't become a prolific issue for everybody. But I grew up in Washington County, and no ticks at all, and now there's a lot of deer ticks there now.
Yeah.
It is a change that we've been seeing along the coast, and as climate change happens, as warmer weather persists, then it will be
Mhm.
continued migration.
Yeah. Well, I can outdo you because I've had Lyme disease twice. And last summer I was in the hospital for a week with anaplasmosis, which is a very dangerous disease to get. So
Yeah,
not fun.
No.
But that doesn't stop me either. Every time I go out in the woods, shower. I
Yeah.
come home and take a shower. Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
I learned my lesson.
Yeah. They have better preventative measures for dogs. than people.
Yeah, they really do.
It's got to get to us eventually, right?
All right, we are going to switch gears a little bit here. I'm going to share my screen again to talk about ways we can incorporate this back into the classroom. I had some really great discussions last week with a 7th grade class in Portland, or multiple 7th grade classes in Portland, on the human impact on forest. Was like the general topic they wanted me to cover. And so we talked a lot about different options for using forests, whether humans should use forests, all of those different things. And it was a really cool conversation, really just kind of getting their minds going on what the options are. There are so many options, and then really bringing it home with that idea that 90% of our landscape is forests, and 90% of those forests are privately owned. So a lot of that responsibility is falling on us as individuals. So it's pretty cool to share with students. So if you all have been to a webinar in this series before, you probably already have the access to Project Learning Trees guide. If you don't, I will be getting it to you soon. And so I'm going to pull out some of the activities in that guide that I think kind of relate here. One of my favorites, especially at this time of year, is bursting buds. I personally am really always enthralled with the concept of leaf out and watching that process of going out in the woods like once a week or something like that at this time of year, and watching the buds change over time. And there are some cool ways of just taking one like small branch that has buds on it and bringing it into the classroom in some water, so that that process can happen in the classroom and we can kind of observe that. But I also really love for the younger kids, just taking some time to really observe the different aspects of trees, what they do and what they provide, which really gets them, builds a base for us to talk about things like conservation and why protecting those things are important, either after those experiences or in later grades. So really instilling those basic concepts of what forests provide us and why they might be really important for us to continue to conserve. Trees in Trouble is one that I have talked a lot about because so many people are so interested in invasives now, and also things like hemlock woolly dalgid. What's the moth that gives you a rash? Thank you. Yes, the spongy moth, and also brown-tail moth, all of those types of things, ultra emerald ash borer. We're all seeing these different things happen and hearing a lot about them. And it can be hard to kind of introduce that topic and why conservation might be important in spite of that. And so Trees in Trouble really looks at recognizing symptoms of those different issues that we're seeing, especially as our forests change over time. And then discussing different options for those different species. And there also is a lot of information and resources on those topics now. There's of course a lot of research going on, and all those scientists really like to do outreach materials and stuff. So there is a ton of different resources on all of those different insects and diseases and all of that. But I also really love Web of Life because it really, I personally, especially when I'm teaching, like to think of forests as like a system of systems or a model of models, right? There's so many ways that you can build that out. And the closer you look at it, the more you see, really. And so I love Web of Life because it kind of builds that foundation and creates the forest as introduces the concept that a forest could be a model or a system and is an ecosystem and all of that. And these ones are my favorite because they really get students actively involved, especially locally. Improve Your Place is really fun because it actually encourages students and gives teachers a framework for creating a project that they'd like to see happen in their local community, their town, or their neighborhood, and actually taking steps or laying out steps to see that happen and advocating for that on different levels. And If You Were the Boss is probably one of my favorite activities because it takes the forest management concept really and makes that into student pages essentially. So there are some really awesome student pages in that activity where students can really dive into what it looks like to be a forest manager and what decisions they face when they're doing their job. And you can even bring in like the economics of it, how much like the cost benefit analysis of a landowner making certain decisions. So I really love those as well. But I also wanted to focus on opportunities for students that are interested in conservation. I think I've heard a lot from teachers that they know students who are really environmentally focused or they're really jazzed about doing things outside and working outside, but they not a lot of guidance counselors or teachers know where to send them if they want to like enrich that a little bit more. Of course, a lot of schools now have a green team or something like an extracurricular type of opportunity. I've seen them even in elementary schools now, which is a great start, but there are also some really incredible opportunities, and Chris mentioned some that I'll touch on here, that we can do for the students that are really looking to kind of explore a little bit more into that. And I'm going to echo Chris here when I start off and say that local collaborations are so important and they're so beneficial. There's so much that can come out from them. I have worked in a couple different states and I've seen classrooms get involved in land trust, local land trusts, in all the states that I've worked in, and they've all been super successful. And land trusts have really wonderful volunteers and staff who are super jazzed about what they do and they really want to share that. Natural resource professionals as a whole have a tendency to be really passionate folks. And so bringing students out into, if not the backyard of your school or your schoolyard, but to a local land trust property is a great opportunity to have students look at a forest through the lens of a natural resource professional or somebody that looks at that land differently than they do, right? A lot of us see that forest as a backdrop, and looking closer, especially through the eyes of somebody who spends a lot of time there and works in those landscapes, can be really eye-opening. But we're also here to make those connections. So if that sounds interesting, but you don't really know where to start, love to help. And I also have a map at the end that will show a little bit more of that too. The other opportunity that we can get you involved with is we have a Green Jobs curriculum. So on top of our K-8 guide, we have a whole nother curriculum that's focused on workforce development and students that are interested in going into conservation or outdoor related careers. And so I can get quiz codes that go out to students and allow them to take essentially a personality quiz that shows them what they might be super successful at in the field, and also allows them to kind of explore those different options, what they look like, which can allow them to kind of take it from there. After that, we frequently try to set them up with somebody locally. We've done that in the past where they get to talk to a forester if that's something that was highlighted in their results, so that they can kind of see what that looks like and continue to explore that. We also, so Project Learning Tree is a national curriculum. So we have a national office of Project Learning Tree, and they have created a game called Forest Quest, which is really cool. And essentially, students go through that game online interface, and they get a credential that says that they're forest literate citizens. And it helps them go through the process of what managing forests and working and recreating within them looks like, and how important but also varied that is, especially as landscape changes and as we all change. So that's really awesome, especially for middle school and even high school. I think it really gets the juices flowing in that direction, I think. There are also a ton of different local initiatives. Portland Youth Corps is a really great example of this, but there are lots of others as well. I'm going to talk about a few of them. So Portland Youth Corps is for students that are under college age, they're under 18, that are looking to do more work outside. It usually relates a lot to trail work, which is actually a really great resume skill to have if you're looking to go into the conservation type careers. Knowing and the different techniques of trail work and all of that is actually really intricate, and having that under your belt before you even go into college is honestly really incredible. So these students that get paid, and they also have spring and fall and summer sessions, so they can do it throughout the school year. And they learn a lot. They also bring in professionals. So it's a really great opportunity, and especially as Portland Youth Corps is getting more and more successful, I think we're going to start seeing more of those type of opportunities, which is really awesome. There's a similar one that is based out of the Seven Lakes Alliance that has been really successful. That's like Belgrade Lakes area, and is similar in the concept of it. I think they just have a summer one, but also still a super awesome opportunity for students, especially consider they can get paid for that over the summer, and also get a lot of that like career type exposure. I think they might be able to get some credits or be able to tie it into their curriculum in other ways as well. So at Maine Tree, we're actually working with Brewer High School to get this forestry and outdoor education summer program kicked off for its inaugural year. So we're really excited to see it happen. This is going to be like a 6-week long summer course where students really dive into all the different aspects of forestry and outdoor careers, and also just general skills, and build them throughout this process. So it's a 6-week long experience for them, and they get a lot of different career exposure opportunities, and they also get to see a lot of different applications of that like forest management and conservation out in the woods actually, and see that hands-on, and really get that hands-on experience of it. And we're hoping that those types of experiences will also be a little bit more accessible too. Like this is just one program. We're hopefully going to see more programs like this continue to evolve as we go. Acadia also has a youth corps that I wanted to mention. Their application closed already for the summer, but they also have a really cool youth corps, so like high school or younger base program that students can go and work out on the national park. And I'm sure, especially if we're all teachers, we're aware of the CTE programs, but I wanted to highlight them because they have some really awesome opportunities. And it can be really helpful to get, especially middle school students, aware that those programs exist. Because if they get into their freshman or sophomore year and start looking into it, it gets more challenging for them to incorporate those programs into their schedules the further you go. So knowing that those opportunities exist earlier in their academic career is really great. I also wanted to mention MLOP, which is the mechanized logging operations. I think the P is program, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yep.
And that's a post-grad opportunity. So if you weren't able to go to a CTE school, you can go through MLOP and they take you through the whole program to make you ready to be an equipment operator and work out in a forestry setting. And I think it's also paid experience as well. So that's a really great program as well. But I wanted to highlight these. Like I said, I'm from Connecticut and they do not have any outdoor programs at their tech schools. And so I personally, just from my perspective, think Maine's really lucky to have all of these options. And we're seeing more. The Tri-County Tech Center Outdoor Leadership Program is new this coming school year. So the more students we send to these programs or have asked about these programs, the more they continue to pop up. And so we're creating more opportunities for students to really dive into what forests look like and what outdoor leaderships and careers and that space really look like, which is awesome. And this is that map that I mentioned. So Maine Land Trust Network has a map of all the different land trusts and what townships they work in. And there's some overlap there as well, but I'm pretty sure every single town and township in Maine is covered. And so that can be a really great resource to hone in and see which ones would be applicable for your district or your school. And like I said, if you're looking to make a connection there, I'm happy to help out with that. Because they can be really great resources and have in the past as well. Okay, and one of our last ones, we mentioned it before, but our Forest Ecology Research Network is, so we set up that program as a way to kind of introduce natural resource professionals into the classroom. So at the end of the process, it's kind of like a day in the life of a forester type of experience. So that framework really helps, it encourages students and creates an opportunity for them to collect data out in the forests, and also annually, because it's annual data collection, they can start comparing that data from year to year and from one location to another. But it also creates a really great opportunity for foresters to come out and show the students how they do all of that and why they might do all of that. And typically if a forester comes out, they also bring the materials for you to do that and get that done. So it can also be super helpful on your end to relieve some of those logistics. All right, so just finishing up here, I wanted to point out some things that are in the back of your guide. So standards, there's a whole PDF separate that is on the standards for every single activity, and it goes by grade level, so it really breaks everything down, which I can help you find if you can't seem to find it. And each activity is also in one of the indices is laid out so that you can see which different topics they cover and subjects and all of that. So if you're looking for one in particular, you can find all of that in the indices, which is super helpful, and that also goes by grade level. But something I've actually stumbled upon in the guide that I didn't know about are units of instruction. So one of the appendices is also it's compiled the lessons into different topic units, and it can be super helpful if you have, for example, like a climate change unit, and you want to kind of see different options for incorporating that and what it might look like to string a couple activities together to kind of make that more holistic. So a great resource there that I think will be helpful. And then I promised that we'd talk about our Forest Maine Teachers Tours as well. That's coming up. We do it every summer. We do 2 in July, and we spend 4 days out in the Maine woods. This year we're going to the Katahdin region, and we're also going down east. And so in those experiences, 2 of the 4 days are professional development, where we really dive into the ways that we can implement outdoor and forest-based education. And we really collaboratively look at all of that and explore the options and explore ways to connect it back into your more intricate situations at your school and your districts. And then the 2 other days are spent out in the woods and out in the forest product sector. So we go to land trust properties, we touch tree farms, we also go to mills and see the different equipment and processes they use once they get wood from a Maine property. So it's a really great process to look at essentially stump to wood product and how that whole system works and the different aspects that go into it. So we definitely touch on forest conservation a lot in that as well. So it's a huge elaboration of what we were talking about today. So with that, I can answer questions if we have any. If we have any questions for Chris, we can also do those. But we also have our emails here. So if you think of questions or ideas, things you want to bounce off people after the fact, we're more than happy to do that. Yeah, so if we have questions, we'll be here.
Just as people are thinking about potential questions they want to ask, I just want to thank Lena and Chris for putting this presentation together, and also Lena for just running the Window to the Woods series for the past 6-8 months or so, whatever it's been. It's been great to see the teachers participating. It's been great to hear the presenters and all the knowledge that they have to share, and just great job, and thank you for everything to make this happen.
Yeah, and also, so I will be sending out the recording to this session, where you'll also get the recordings for all the other sessions too. So if you do all of them together, you can get 9 contact hours for those different sessions. And I'll also be sending out before we do it like a quick, like 3-question Google form for you to get those contact hours. So I'll also be sending all of that stuff out as well. And once I get all that processed, I'll send out your contact hour information and all of that too. So you'll be getting a few things from me in the next few weeks for sure.
We have a question in the chat. You mentioned Acadia's deadline for Youth Corps has ended. When was the other Youth Corps deadline?
So I believe the 7 Lakes deadline was in May. I believe Portland Youth Corps was also in May. So we still have a little bit of time for those 2. I know they were still open, but I believe they're either mid or late May.
Okay, I have a question. If I'm primarily interested in just the ecology of forests and not, harvesting and all of that stuff. Are there any courses just for that so I can learn more about the land that I own and all the intricate ecology that's involved?
One of the sessions we did in this series in the fall was on forest biology and ecology. That one was really incredible. We had a UMO professor that came on and talked a lot about all of those processes, and then we had a teacher kind of talk about how she incorporates that into her classroom. So that was a really great experience. I also there are a ton of different resources depending on where you are located. District foresters can be a really great resource for that through the Maine Forest Service. And then I also have seen a lot of teachers collaborate with local researchers to bring their students kind of into that process, which has been really cool as well. And our last Window to the Woods session was on our changing forest, so the climate aspects of it and how our forests have changed and will likely change, and how one teacher incorporated that into her classroom. That one was also really good. There were a ton of different resources that she shared on learning more and diving deeper into that as well.
You mentioned before about remote sensing, and is there satellite imagery available to private citizens that give more detailed information than, Google Earth. So I'm interested in GIS. I study GIS and I'm looking for layers that might show my particular location in additional detail.
Chris, do you have a response or do you want me to field it?
I'm not, so we use the USDA NAIP layers, the NAIP, NAIP. I think the last one that came out was 21. They usually come out every other year, sometimes every third, depending. And they are we use that a lot to look, we use it as a background on a lot of our maps, and then we use it to look at things that if they've changed and things like that. I'm sure there are other resources out there. That's my first go-to.
Are those free to the public?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, you just have to know where to look for them. And yeah, just searching NAIP, NAIP, US imagery is probably a good place to start.
Okay.
So there's NAIP, and that's really fine resolution. I think it's 2 meters, or it's
Really?
really fine resolution. There's also satellite imagery from Landsat. That's a 30-meter resolution, so it's not as fine, but kind of more broad scale. The data is not as big. So those are the two things that I think about, and it just depends on what your application is for. The NAIP imagery files are really, really large because it's so fine resolution, and so it can make your computer go really slow.
Okay. But can you just isolate an area, or do you have to import the whole state, or?
They have like different blocks of areas that they cover, and then from that you'll import that into the GIS system, and then you can clip out the area that you're looking at, and that will help kind of speed things up for you. I'm sure Chris has a system like that.
Okay, thank you.
We haven't even gotten into LiDAR yet, which is kind of laser points and 3D imagery, and that's even further down the road. But most of these resources are government funded, so NAIP and the Landsat data are all government funded, so they're all publicly accessible for the most part. Oh, you're muted, Ed.
Yeah. So LiDAR is not available now? That's planned for the future? Or
I would need to look into what the details are, but it's still like a developing technology at this point, so it's not as fine of resolution. There's some areas that have really fine resolution, but other areas that aren't. So it's still a little ways to go before it's
okay. Thank you.
They're still doing a lot of there's a lot of grad students and professors that do talks on both GIS and LiDAR. So that can be a resource too. I'm sure they're probably available. I know that UMO probably has quite a few different researchers that are really diving into that. I'm sure they'd be helpful too. Cool. Well, I'll stick around here for a few more minutes if anybody else has other questions, but otherwise, thank you all for coming today. And you'll be hearing from me soon for the recording and all those resources.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for all this. One question. How do you measure how much